No one could accuse Will Johnston of being a shrinking violet, which, given his sartorial style, is kind of stating the obvious. But don't let the supersized teddy bear coat fool you. As executive director at MicroLife Incorporated, Johnston is a vocal advocate for downsizing and was an early adopter of Atlanta's tiny house movement. He lives by the mantra, less space, more life, and wants people to think of home as a small space that can propel us into a far wider world of possibilities. I'm Gail O'Neill. Join me and my producer, Felipe Barral, as Will Johnston invites us into his tiny office on Atlanta's Beltline to talk about the massive potential for sparking joy by thinking small on this episode of Collective Knowledge. Because spreading knowledge is the most altruistic thing we can do as human beings. I'm going to start with a quote of yours. You have said, "Most people will hold on to things for all the wrong reasons. We tend to think our homes should fulfill our every need. But you, want to challenge people to think of home as a small space that can propel you into a far wider world of possibilities." Where did you learn that lesson, Will?
First of all, I love that you said that I quoted it because I have no recollection of when I said that, but it does sound like me. So I'm at that point in my life where I'm like, you know what? I don't remember yesterday, but I'm gonna have a good tomorrow. So I think I learned that, you know, I've gone through, you know, I think it's the ups and downs of life. You realize those experiences of what makes you just like wide smile and excitement. And I remember it's me going to a destination, or just that little giddy feeling as you're getting on the plane knowing you're going to somewhere great. And when I'm sitting, yes, but also it's when I host people at my house, or like I entertain. So like there's moments in my life that I know I just feel this overwhelming sense of just elation of just like, I am happy. This is happiness. And when I think about those moments, stuff has nothing to do with it. Right. So Claudia Morris Barclay is one of my original 11 that started with me at my original tiny house meetup. And she and I and 10 or 9 others sat at the bottom of Wrecking Bar Brew Pub, and we talked about what does it mean to live in this small space. Claudia has a good way of explaining, and she just spoke at one of our events, and she really talks about that things that spark joy, but also that sometimes when you have the things that you don't use as much is that mental clutter. So now we're talking about physical clutter, and then we get into the mental clutter of what the extra things do to you on a day-to-day. And that you do not realize you have that tennis racket that you say that you're eventually gonna get lessons, or a ukulele that you say you're eventually gonna learn how to play. And it weighs on you. It actually, I think, almost can depress you because you have set yourself up for failure because you aren't doing it on your day-to-day.
The interesting thing about accumulating wealth or material things is that the more you have, the more you look at it and think, that's a reflection of me, so I ought to reflect back that I'm happy, I'm grateful, and I've achieved some kind of a dream.
I also love one of my, I follow Josh Becker. I think Josh Becker, I believe he's a minimalist and a father, and talks about how to be minimalist with a family. And he says, now look around your room, like everything in that room used to be money. And it just kind of makes you shocked. Like, even though like money is not always happiness, but it's nice to have a chunk of change in the bank or in the stock market or working for you. But like, you know, that extra $10 or extra $5 that you bought for a tchotchke or something else, or you're looking around your room, you're like, oh my gosh, why did I buy all this?
You had the big comfy chair, the flashy new car, the corporate job, and you were on the ladder going up and high, and what happened?
So it did not connect. So like you said, I had the pie chart. I had the nightlife and friends and interaction and job and condo, and I would wake up every morning and I was just like, this can't be my life. I really didn't understand how this was supposed to make me happy. A day-to-day where I was told I was mediocre because they didn't want to pay me more. You know, it's again like it's just the general sense of corporate America can mess with you and your happiness, because if you put your all into it and they say you're not good enough for that promotion or you're not good enough, you really need to do a lot of soul searching. And I had to cut the cord. 5 years ago, I bought a round trip ticket to New Zealand. And so I found the WWOOFing program, which is the Worldwide Opportunities for Organic Farmers in New Zealand. And I just worked on vineyards for 3 months, backpacking around, interacting with people, really trying to let go of what I was marketed and told to be, to trying to become Will. And sometimes it's building that life that you don't have to take a vacation from. You know, my job right now is to educate and advocate.
All right, let's go back to New Zealand. You're on the vineyard for 3 months, so now you are physically fit, you are working your body, your mind. I'm guessing all of your 5 senses are engaged all the time.
But I'm also letting go.
Okay.
Like, so being 33 at the time, and only knowing that, no other 33-year-old is traveling at that moment because their job, family, bought a house, mortgage, like they're
anchored.
They are anchored.
Yeah.
And so the people I had the ability to interact with were 18 to 22-year-olds or 70 to 80-year-olds retirement. So like they're traveling, the kids are traveling. It's the gap year of a lot of Europeans. So I met Italians, French, some Americans, Germans. Like, you know, it's like it was just a great experience of meeting all these young kids. They called me grandpa, which I did not appreciate.
I love the juxtaposition of very young people, millennials, and people who are in their retirement age. Tell me what those two, where they're connected and what they had in common and what they taught you from being around them.
They were out there to let the world influence them.
Right.
And that was a new idea to me, because what we are taught as Americans, like, you know, middle school, high school, go to college, get a degree, maybe get a master's, and get a good job, find someone, meet them, marry, house, kids, you know,
grandkids,
retirement, death. You're like, oh God, that is the most boring life ever. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I love my grandparents. They did that. I watched, both grandparents did that, and my parents did that. And so, but I don't want to feel like I'm not following suit, or I mean, don't get me wrong, I would love a family, but I think what we were talking about earlier, the way we are defining the American dream has completely changed. With the way things are, the way things cost, we have to redefine how we survive and what we feel is home. Home is changing. The definition of where we live is changing. It has to.
All right, I'm going to come back to that, but now I want you to take me back to New Zealand.
Okay.
You're flying home to Atlanta.
Yes.
What are you flying to?
So, I had that question. I was like, all right, do I come back? The whole reason of putting stuff away was not knowing if I was going to come home. And I knew if I wanted to become my own entity, I had to go back to Atlanta, because, you know, even though corporate America kind of sucked my soul out, but I still made the best of it. Like, I still had amazing friends and amazing connections and amazing people in Atlanta. So like, I didn't want to give up on Atlanta. And then I started noticing, you know, tiny houses and these micro spaces on my Instagram and social media feeds. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was starting to read their philosophy and align with them. I was like, you know what? Smaller spaces do make a lot of sense.
And what is the mission of the tiny houses movement?
Our mission is to educate, advocate, and research and do pilot projects all around the micro-built environment to help people understand what is possible in their community. And the more we get into this, the more we realize it is not just about tiny spaces. It is about becoming glue to a community that needs walkability, density, and well thought out planning, so people can actually interact with each other again. Mm-hmm. So what we have been from the 60s, where the homes were like 1,600 square feet and you had 3.5 people living in them. Then you go to today, where it's doubled, 2,600 square feet, and it's almost 3,000 square feet, and only 2.5 people are living in it. So you have these giant McMansions with 5 bedrooms and 2 people living in them. And we're actually, as Americans, as America, we are actually, I can be start decreasing in population soon, we are actually not reproducing at enough rate to repopulate. So our numbers are going to be going down. Our homes are getting bigger. They're getting more expensive. And people are just saying, well, how like, I don't know what jobs are out there, because the jobs are not keeping up with how much inflation's going up. So I just could not believe how much was in our wheelhouse of what we had to interact with, thinking of small spaces.
How did we get to start thinking that bigger is better in homes? Because what happens is you build these dream homes, like these little fiefdoms, and they're supposed to have everything in there to satisfy your every need. But what they do is create a lot of isolation.
Complete isolation.
Mommy can do one thing here, Daddy do something here, Junior doing something downstairs, Grandma doing... Forget Grandma, because she has no multi-generational living. How did we get to that? How did we move away from connection and community within our own homes?
You know, it's funny. I think... and there's an article out there, and a couple articles actually, probably lots of studies, but blame the baby boomers.
Okay. Why?
Because the baby boomers, they had the ability to expand. They saw, you know, after World War II, small tight-knit communities, and they're like, well, I want a little bit bigger. I want a little bit bigger. I want a little bit bigger. And I feel like because we had the space, and we are not Europe, and we are not Japan, we are not other countries, we have the space to be big. But we didn't have the wisdom to be nimble. We did not have the wisdom to really think through our zoning, and our zoning is what's killing us right now. If you think about what we're doing with Atlanta, and hopefully, so right now, you can only build basically 4 types of homes in Atlanta. You've got single family, attached condo, low-level multifamily, and high-rise multifamily. That's basically it in the city of Atlanta. And then back in the 20s and 30s, you know, we had the ability to build, you know, quadplexes where there's 4 families living in a house that is divided in a well-thought, you know, plan. There's ways for us to create little bungalow courts, or, you know, live in people's backyards where the accessory dwelling units, or carriage houses, or granny flats, whatever you want to call them. There was ways for people to be inventive and innovative with their living space. But now we've also shifted away, and this is a very Western idea. We went from thinking about homes to investments. So we are not thinking of our homes as a place of sanctuary. We are seeing them as money, value to our portfolio, and how we're going to get rich.
And status symbols too, to your earlier point.
So, you know, I wholeheartedly believe a small space propels you forward. So, because, like, think about it. You clean it quicker, you interact with it a lot more, you get bored quicker. So, like, what does that do? I'm like, you know what? I'm bored. I'm going to go outside. Go be a part of the community. Where then you just like you said, we build basically our little mini cities inside our houses that have the private outdoor backyards, or even, heck, people have bowling alleys. People put everything into their homes, and so they stay there. And then
they build a prison.
They build a prison that they don't realize it's a prison. They're like, you know what? We should invite people over. Who invites people over to their homes? Like, getting on someone's porch right now is almost an instant death wish.
Right.
Because we are scared of each other. So we have basically, you know, destructuralized what is meant to be a community, and we are not designing to be that way.
Do you think your childhood in West Virginia, rural West Virginia, presaged your desire as an adult to create community and connection through tiny homes and the MicroLife Institute?
I think the bigger influence of why I want to drive community are my parents. Because we opened our house to people, meaning, like, you know, Christmas open houses, you know, to family, to gatherings, to interacting. Like, it's the idea of congregating. And I think as neighborhoods, and I'm not saying like all neighborhoods are terrible, I'm just saying that, like, some neighborhoods get it right. Some neighborhoods understand that there needs to be an anchor. There needs to be kind of the mayor of the area, whether it's the older gentleman or older lady, or that one overzealous male that wants to always have a barbecue in his backyard. There needs to be a driver. And it was interesting, just like in politics and just like in major metropolitan cities, there needs to be influencers. And there needs to be correct influencers of where we need to go, instead of kind of like, oh, well, we're just going to be over here making money. We'll just let this happen. When we need the billionaire and millionaires in entities in cities like Atlanta to step up and be the influencer and say, that's not how this should go. Right. We need to, just shift to the left a little and go on this course. Because, it was interesting reading, some of Atlanta's history recently for a leadership class I'm in. It was amazing that the Woodruffs and the Candlers and the people who had the money were able to influence the right direction that Atlanta needed to go in.
But these are also the people who have extreme wealth,
yes,
inherited wealth as well. So in a sense, they have bought into a paradigm that says bigger is better. Do you find it's hard to convince people like that smaller might be better or more nimble might be better?
I think there is a huge movement because as I talk to all walks of life, from 18 to 85, whether they are millennials to ready to retire rich, grandparents, they don't like the fact that they've got all of these things around them. Mm-hmm. And they're wanting to know. Now, again, being in a smaller footprint is not for everyone, and I completely recognize that. But I also want people to realize that this is a choice that people should not be afraid to jump into.
What does tiny living look like in terms of square footage and what I get to put in my little dwelling? And by the way, we're in your beautiful tiny office. So yes, we are
in my tiny office. So again, the tiny office was built in partnership with the city of Atlanta, as well as Hana Solar and Mitsubishi and a number of other great organizations.
Tesla, don't you have a Tesla battery wall?
We have a Tesla Powerwall, which is donated to us by Hana Solar. We have 6 solar panels. We've got our mini split, luminaire windows and doors.
What is a mini split?
A mini split is a heating and cooling element.
Oh, okay.
So that's what this structure is up here. And you can set it to hot, set it to cold. It heats and cools up to 1,000 square feet. We're only in 180.
Whoa, okay. Yeah.
This is 180 square feet. So it is not oppressive. It is not like claustrophobic. And I designed it this way. Even though now hindsight 2020, would love to renovate and have a little bit more of office-y type things instead of just kind of general open boardroom table style.
Yes, yeah.
But it does what it needs to do, which is challenge our utilization of space. We were to build this somewhere else.
Okay.
Drive it in and set it up in 10 minutes.
So we're on wheels now.
Yes.
And if somebody says, Will, I want to meet you on the West End, you say, I'll be there in 10 minutes, and you just hook it up to a U-Haul and drive it off.
Yep, we've got a Dodge.
Well,
yes.
Okay, wait a second. When you're rolling down Peachtree in Atlanta, what is the response of pedestrians and birders and people in cars?
Well, it's like that, It's like when you are wearing a really fancy outfit or like a costume that really calls attention.
You mean like your coat I'm about to take you outside in?
Yes. So it's that idea of people stop. You can see the question kind of forming what is that? And then the expression of they're like, oh, that's a tiny house. Oh my gosh. Phone out, click, 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 click. And
while they're driving.
Yeah, while they're driving, which scares me. But then you get the people on the side of the roads are like, honey, that's what I've been telling you about. And it's hilarious. It's almost like a comedic routine where I almost would love to kind of stand in this as we drive it around and just because I also it was going to be part of the Pride Parade one year and I want to do that as well and kind of expose it to different scenarios throughout Atlanta.
That would be great.
But it lets people be like, oh, that's what I've seen on TV. Oh, that's here. So again, with our signage and just trying to educate people, we want people to know that Atlanta is encroaching on opening up the floodgates. Mm-hmm. As Atlanta is, as the mayor is dedicated to giving $1 billion towards affordable housing, we need to look at all options.
Right.
And all options is innovative zoning.
What are the impediments to innovative zoning?
So, a lovely little thing called NIMBYism. Do you know what?
Not in my backyard-ism?
Not in my backyard.
Okay.
So, the biggest threat to ourselves is ourselves. Everyone looks at their homes and their neighborhoods as investments right now.
Okay.
And so they will not be progressive. They fight like hell to get into that neighborhood. And then they fight like hell
to keep
it
out.
the same.
Yes, yes.
And so it's not just tiny houses. It's not accessory dwelling units. It's everything from daycares to businesses to everything. That group forms, it coagulates, it just becomes this negative ball of a downward spiral of, from historic preservation to such and such. Like, I believe in historic preservation, but if a building takes more money to restore it than it would be to, build other types of buildings so people can live there, I want to weigh, does that make sense?
You at least want to ask the question.
I want to ask the question.
On the table. Yeah.
When it comes down to it, is people saying, oh, I want more housing or I want to help, but just not in my neighborhood.
Right.
I want it in that neighborhood. Then you go over to that neighborhood and they're like, oh, we want affordable housing or we want more housing, but just not in our neighborhood. Throw it back to the other neighborhood. So it's this ping pong ball that's just going everywhere.
So what zones in Atlanta, if there are any now, are amenable or open to the idea of tiny houses?
So I'm going to follow up with a question.
Yeah.
Which type of tiny house are you looking at?
Well, one on wheels or one on a foundation. It doesn't matter. I just want a 400 square foot house.
So the biggest issue with wheel-based models is that they are defined by the state of Georgia as a recreational vehicle.
And there's a whole snobbery around recreational vehicles.
Yes, there's a whole stigma around recreational vehicles. People see the wheels and they're like, oh, trailer park. And you're like, oh, come on, people.
Let's give people the benefit of the doubt. What is the difference between a tiny house on wheels and a recreational vehicle?
My immediate response to that is the quality and how it's intended to be utilized. Mm-hmm. So you look around here, woods. Very
real
homey
wood,
feel, real
not
wood.
here.
And so
No
again,
plastic.
you actually have 6 inches with insulation. An RV, I think it's 3 inches you're allowed to use. So again, the feel and texture and how they are built is so much different than the way that a tiny house is built. A tiny house is built using house building practices. Instead of saying we're building a recreational vehicle to be in sometimes, we're building this structure to be in all the time.
And it does have a sense of permanence and
yes,
solidity.
and it is meant to feel like a home.
Yes.
Where a recreational vehicle or a mobile home, I feel like I think, again, it's amazing what architecture and design does to one's mentality.
What I see, Will, is the difference between living in a jewel box or living in a big
Cardboard
featureless
box.
cardboard box.
Yes.
You can live in that big cardboard box if you want to, that has no soul, no beauty, no intention for human habitation, or you can live in this really beautifully little crafted space.
And that crafted space is gonna be designed to interact with other crafted spaces around it. And that's something else. I mean, just because we want you to live in a smaller space doesn't mean we need a plethora of all of those designs in one. We want people to incorporate. So
Have the option.
exactly. So like developers, like I want them to realize, like if they're ready to build their quote unquote products, which is a development, they need a range. They need the smaller square footprint up to the big ones. We need different sizes of homes everywhere because that's also what generates community. You need diversity, you need different classes, you need different professions, all in one community because that's where we learn.
Why does beauty matter?
It doesn't. Functionality matters. But beauty, you look at the modern day architecture and you look at modern day, definition of what is beauty, and beauty can be so simplistic. And that goes with housing too. And I don't understand why we have to complicate things. We have complicated things. As humans, we have involved, our history, racism, greed, like all of these things have created zoning and codes.
That's so true.
And we keep people out when we would be a better system and community if we let them in. That's beauty.
Okay, so the whole idea of collective knowledge is to invite people like you to share 3 ideas that our viewers can incorporate to enhance their lives. I'm not going to say change their lives. For people who say, I can't move into a tiny house, Will, I just need to have my 2,000 shoes, give us 3 tips in which we can occupy less space and give ourselves more life. That is your mission, right? Tiny house
Yes,
Atlanta,
less space, more life.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna channel Claudia, who I was mentioning earlier. Claudia definitely has that. First thing is, if you're on this path saying, oh my gosh, my house is overwhelming me, that's first step. Knowing that your possessions cause you grief or cause you stress. So recognizing that, if you could reduce, and I'm not saying reduce all, but maybe it's time to downsize and organize. Not downsize in the sense of getting a smaller house, but downsize in the sense of amount of stuff. What's fascinating that we were talking to earlier is that, like, when you buy a bigger house, you have to put more stuff in it.
Yeah.
And we've also been told, like, you go to your grandma's house and she's got knick-knack things, and it's like, why do we even have those things? It's all made in China.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how is this sentimental? Or but for some reason that's what they were taught that is happiness. And so it's like, it's not that it's wrong, it's that we evolve. So being able to recognize that having less could mean a better mental state. And then second is, don't do too much at a time. If you say, I'm going to take care of this whole room, it will never get done. So you need to say, I'm going to spend a half hour on this upper drawer.
Okay, yes.
Done. Going to pull it all out, pick it up. Does this bring me joy?
Achievable goals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Achievable goals, and then physically touching it. Touching it and asking out loud, does this bring me joy? And if the answer is no, put it over here. Right. Answer is yes, put it over here. Well, the yes pile goes back in the cupboard or move to another thing. So again, bite off little bits. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
I hope never to learn.
I know.
But I'll take your word for it.
So it's, recognition that you have too much stuff, saying like, okay, I know I'm not going to move into a smaller space, but I need to start decluttering.
Right.
Decluttering helps decluttering the mind as well. So getting rid of things, even though, so here's a quick tip of like, okay, this thing was given to me by my great grandmother and it is ratty and ugly and I don't really like it, but it just reminds me of my great grandmother. Why are we holding on to this thing then if it's just deteriorated or even if it's not that pretty? It doesn't spark joy, it just reminds you of. So what a lot of people are doing is creating photo catalogs or ways or art pieces of those things that remind them. So they do try to beautify it or create something with it or take a photo of it and do something with it and then get rid of it. Okay. So there's a process. And that's what this also, I think the biggest challenge of trying to downsize is that people just feel completely overwhelmed. And they just don't want to start. So again, small things at a time. Every day, half hour, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, tackle a drawer. Separate, yes, like, no joy, move on to the next day. Because then we've got 365 days, you'll eventually get through the whole house. Make it a habit.
Right. Okay, thank you, Will. Thank you very much for just starting this conversation and for being so inclusive in your thinking.
Thank you.
You had the big life and everything. You discovered something that was more significant to you when you went smaller, and you thought, I want to tell people about this.
Yep.
And you're doing that. Yeah, so I really appreciate it.
Coming up next on Collective Knowledge, Larry Walker, visual artist and retired art professor and mentor.
Somewhere along the way, the piece in this conversation I'm having with it, it starts to talk back and says, hey, Walker, I'm done. Leave me alone. Back off.
Do you ever argue when the piece says I'm done and you say, no, you're not, and you keep going?
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Yeah. Well, one of us wins. Once the piece says, I'm done, leave me alone, and you do that, and you leave it alone, there it sits there, sitting there minding its own business. It should have its own sense of destiny.
Don't forget to share this episode, like us, or send us a comment. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and please subscribe to our channel on YouTube.